A woman named Sarah spent 4 hours deciding whether to send a 2-sentence email to her manager. She wrote it, deleted it, rewrote it, analyzed every possible interpretation of every word, wondered if hi was too casual, wondered if hello was too formal, imagined her manager reading it with a frown, imagined being called into a meeting, imagined losing her job. 4 hours, 2 sentences. She never sent the email. The next morning, her manager walked by her desk and casually answered the question she had been agonizing over. It had never mattered, but her brain had treated it like a threat to her survival. If that sounds familiar, you are not broken. You are caught in one of the most common and least understood neurological traps the human brain can fall into. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why it happens and precisely how to stop it. Overthinking is not just thinking too much. It is a specific, identifiable brain state with measurable neural signatures. Neuroscientists call it rumination, the compulsive repetition of a thought or problem without making progress toward a solution. It is the mental equivalent of a car with its wheels spinning in mud. Maximum effort, zero movement. The key player in rumination is the default mode network. The DMN. This is a collection of brain regions, primarily the medial prefrontal cortex and the posterior cingulate cortex, that activates when you are not focused on the external world. In a healthy brain, the DMN handles self-reflection, future planning, and social cognition. It is where you process your identity, your memories, and your relationships. It is essential. But in overthinkers, the DMN does not just activate, it dominates. A 2015 study published in Biological Psychiatry by researchers at Stanford University found that people suffering from chronic rumination showed hyperconnectivity within the default mode network. The regions that should activate briefly during moments of reflection were instead locked in a state of perpetual firing, drowning out other neural networks and trapping the person in an endless internal monologue. Here is the critical insight. Your brain cannot distinguish between a real threat and an imagined one. When you replay a conversation from last week and imagine it going badly, your amygdala fires the same stress response as if the bad outcome were happening right now. Cortisol floods your system, your heart rate increases, your muscles tense. You are having a physiological emergency response to something that exists only inside your own skull. Under normal circumstances, you have a built-in mechanism for stopping rumination. It is your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for executive function, decision-making, and cognitive control. Think of it as the brain's brake pedal. When a thought spiral begins, a healthy prefrontal cortex steps in, evaluates the thought rationally, and redirects your attention. But the prefrontal cortex runs on glucose and has a limited capacity for sustained effort. Every decision you make, every act of self-control, every time you force yourself to focus, it draws from the same finite pool of cognitive resources. This is what psychologists call ego depletion. A 2019 study published in NeuroImage examined brain activity in participants who were subjected to prolonged cognitive tasks. After just 6 hours of sustained mental effort, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex showed significantly reduced activity, and participants became far more susceptible to impulsive decisions and, critically, repetitive negative thinking. The brake pedal had worn out. This is why overthinking gets worse at night. By the end of the day, your prefrontal cortex is depleted. The DMN, which requires no effort to activate, takes over unopposed. You lie in bed and your brain begins replaying every mistake, every awkward interaction, every uncertain future scenario. Not because the nighttime is inherently anxious, but because the one brain region that could stop the spiral has been exhausted by the demands of the day. A 2021 meta-analysis in Psychological Bulletin reviewing 1113 studies confirmed that rumination is one of the strongest transdiagnostic risk factors for depression and anxiety. It does not just accompany these conditions. It predicts them. People who ruminate are not anxious because they overthink. They become anxious because the neurological loop degrades their emotional regulation over time. Here is the cruelest feature of overthinking. The tool you instinctively use to escape it is the very thing keeping you trapped. When you are stuck in a thought loop, your natural response is to think harder, to analyze more, to try to solve the problem by examining it from yet another angle. But rumination is not problem solving. It is problem rehearsing. Dr. Susan Nolan Hoeksema, the late Yale psychologist who pioneered the study of rumination, made a critical distinction. Problem solving is active, forward-moving, and solution-oriented. Rumination is passive, circular, and focused on the problem itself, why it happened, what it means, what it says about you. Her research found that people who were instructed to think about their feelings after a negative event felt worse than those who were distracted from thinking about it at all. The cognitive loop works like this. A triggering thought activates the DMN. The DMN generates emotional distress. The distress activates the prefrontal cortex, which attempts to analyze and solve the problem. But the problem is abstract. What if I am not good enough? And has no concrete solution. The prefrontal cortex fails to resolve it and exhausts itself in the attempt. With the prefrontal cortex weakened, the DMN reasserts dominance. The loop repeats. Each cycle deepens the neural pathway, making the loop easier to trigger and harder to escape. A 2020 study in the journal Cognitive Therapy and Research used real-time neural monitoring to track this cycle and found that participants averaged 7 to 12 loops per rumination episode, with each loop lasting approximately 30 to 90 seconds. The entire episode could last anywhere from 10 minutes to several hours, with the person fully believing they were making progress when they were, in neurological terms, running in place. Mel Robbins' 5-second rule is deceptively simple, but it is grounded in solid neuroscience. The moment you notice a thought loop beginning, you count backward. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then physically move. Stand up. Walk to another room. Change your posture. Do anything that disrupts the current physical and neurological state. Why does this work? Counting backward requires engagement of the prefrontal cortex in a focused sequential task, exactly the kind of activity that interrupts DMN dominance. The physical movement activates the motor cortex and shifts the brain's resource allocation away from the rumination circuit. You are not solving the problem. You are breaking the loop. A 2017 study in Frontiers in Psychology found that brief physical movement interventions, as short as 2 minutes, significantly reduced self-reported rumination and lowered cortisol levels. You do not need an hour at the gym. You need 5 seconds of disruption at the right moment. Practical takeaway: set a mental tripwire. The moment you catch yourself replaying the same thought for the second time, count backward from 5 and move your body. Do not wait until you are deep in the spiral. Interrupt it early. This technique comes from cognitive behavioral therapy and directly addresses the brain's need to process unresolved concerns. Instead of fighting your tendency to worry, you contain it. Choose a specific 15-minute window each day, say 5030 p.m. That is your designated worry time. During the rest of the day, every time an anxious or ruminative thought arises, you acknowledge it and tell yourself, I will think about this at 5000. A 2011 study in behavior research and therapy tested this exact approach and found that participants who used scheduled worry time experienced a 35% reduction in anxiety and a significant decrease in ruminative episodes within 2 weeks. The technique works because it does not suppress the thought. Suppression backfires, as research on ironic process theory by Daniel Wegner has shown. Instead, it postpones it. Your brain accepts the postponement because you have promised to return to the thought later. By the time 5030 arrives, most of the worries will have lost their emotional charge. The amygdala's response fades when there is temporal distance between the trigger and the processing. You are using the brain's own time decay mechanisms to diffuse the emotional bomb before you sit down to examine it. Practical takeaway: buy a small notebook and label it your worry journal. When a ruminative thought appears outside your scheduled window, write 1 sentence about it and close the book. You are not ignoring the thought. You are containing it until a time when you can address it with a rested, functional prefrontal cortex. This is the most powerful technique, drawn from acceptance and commitment therapy, developed by psychologist Stephen C. Hayes. Cognitive diffusion does not try to stop the thought or challenge its content. It changes your relationship to the thought entirely. The core principle is this: you are not your thoughts. A thought is a neurological event, a pattern of electrical impulses firing across synaptic connections. It has no more inherent truth than a random image in a dream. But overthinkers fuse with their thoughts. They treat "I might fail" not as a thought, but as a fact. Cognitive diffusion breaks that fusion. The classic exercise: take the ruminative thought, say "I am not good enough," and repeat it with the prefix, "I notice I am having the thought that I am not good enough." That single linguistic reframe activates the medial prefrontal cortex in observer mode rather than participant mode. You become the audience watching the thought, not the actor living inside it. A 2012 study in behavior therapy found that just 3 sessions of cognitive diffusion training reduced the believability and distress of negative thoughts by over 40%. Participants did not change the content of their thoughts. They changed how seriously their brains treated them. Practical takeaway: the next time you catch a ruminative thought, do not argue with it. Do not try to prove it wrong. Simply label it. There is the failure thought again. There is the not good enough story. You are training your brain to observe its own output without automatically believing it. Over time, the thoughts lose their gravitational pull. Overthinking is not intelligence, it is not depth, it is not sensitivity. It is a malfunction, a loop in the neural circuitry that burns your cognitive resources, degrades your emotional health, and steals the one thing you can never get back: time. Every hour you spend replaying a conversation that already happened is an hour stolen from a life you have not yet lived. Every night you lie awake constructing worst-case scenarios is a night your brain could have spent consolidating memories, processing emotions, and preparing you for tomorrow. Your mind is the most sophisticated instrument in the known universe. But no one gave you the manual. Now you have 3 tools: disruption, containment, and diffusion. They are simple.